Yo! Video games.
What up, dudes, and welcome back to the YoVideogames podcast. I'm Matt.
And I'm Andrew.
And once again, thank you to all our generous patrons who get us going for over 400 episodes.
Yeah, if you're interested in becoming a patron at any level, please check out patreon.com/YoVideogames podcast. Dude of the week is Mike A. Thank you, Mike. I think been dude of the week in the past, but it's been
Dude of the week for a special episode because it's a long time coming, and I kept putting this off. We had Lorecast before for Zelda and for Resident Evil.
This is going to be the most difficult Lorecast because it's.
I'm gonna try. So
so you've played all the games. I have not. I have watched.
I play them weekly, at least. I played them today.
Yeah. So my questions and my asides and insights are going to be based on the stuff that he says, but also the stuff that I've looked into about it and dived a little bit off track without him knowing what I'm looking into. Just to throw him for a loop. We'll see.
Yeah,
but
that'd be fun.
It is a very heady. It's not convoluted. Convoluted's the wrong word.
And I'm trying. Okay, I'm going to try to take the convolution out of this. I get it. It's an iceberg of a franchise and a series, and there's a lot of things. And I know people have tried to basically make explanation videos, and I waited intentionally until all material for this franchise was at a I don't want to say completed, but at a stopping point. They have said that they're at a stopping point, with the franchise. They're not stopping to make the end. They're just like, hey, this is the end of our story right here, of where we currently are with the story, yada yada. That includes games, art books, and other material, which I don't know why I don't have in my hand. But I guess not.
We're going to be doing several parts. One of the reasons why explainer videos are going to be very impossible about that, or maybe not impossible, but cumulatively, we expect this to take about 4 hours total. Today's episode's going to be entirely about ancient history, as you saw in the title, and will probably be the shortest of the episodes.
Yeah,
but as we go deeper into it, it gets there. We're going to try and explain it as clearly as possible, and you'll see why it's going to be hard to keep a through line. So we're not necessarily going to go into every single side story detail, is my understanding. Because
I'm not going to give you a play-by-play of what happens with this character.
Yeah, play the fucking game.
Here's the thing. This is a chronological explanation. I'm not doing this by release order. I'm not doing this by game order. This is taking everything and putting it in a chronological space, which I don't know if that's really been done before, to try to look, this isn't about game order release or whatever, or this is chronologically starting from now in present day to where the games take place and where they end up at.
And you're going to see why that's real hard. You're gonna see. I'm sure there's some niche part for those of you that are huge fans of the series. There's going to be some niche part that we're going to gloss over or not talk about, and you're going to be pissed.
And that's the scary part, is just kind of like missing something. And I feel like it's inevitable. But let me just try to make this. I guess this isn't so much for the hardcore. I mean, welcome if you are, but this is for people who just want to brush up, or especially for people who haven't played through the games and kind of just want to, hey, what's this about? What is this? I want to try to explain this, and I want to try to explain it in a way that at least keeps you somewhat engaged the whole way through.
Yeah, so, and a lot of people love these games and obviously evangelize for them. So this is just a way to get you to be able to still talk to those friends.
Yeah.
But what is ancient history? Ancient history is the early 21st century. Early 2000s, baby.
So yeah, here we go. This is chronologically beginning to end Xenoblade in chronological order. And yes, early 21st century. Now, they don't give a specific date, but it's kind of irrelevant. It's early 21st century. This actually follows the same plot line as Xenogears and Xenosaga. And for anyone who wants to know, if you're diving in, they're not related canonically. They're different series. It's like Ultimate Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, Uncanny X-Men, Amazing X-Men, something like that. Kind of the same general idea, but like a different retelling.
And we
So
will be referencing certain things that were more explained in the other series
right, right.
because
So
of that crossover, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And this starts with the starting point of the Xenoblade series is early 21st century, so basically present day, maybe even 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago even. Uh, and it starts with an archaeological dig in Kenya. Now, Kenya is not stated by name in Xenoblade. It just says Africa. However, if we go by both Xenosaga and Xenogears, it's Kenya. Why Kenya? Because it's the birthplace of humanity in sort of a way, which is why I think the company chose Kenya to be the starting point of all the Xeno franchises.
Makes
Um,
sense. Yeah.
I mean, the game is made by a company called Monolith Soft. It's all 2001.
Well, that and Kenya, I think, has never been conquered, right? Isn't Kenya the African like kingdom that has never? It's never.
I cannot actually confirm that one. I don't believe so, but
There is one that is it's a very cool story. Total aside. Anyway, Kenya.
a dried lake bed in Kenya, archaeologists dig up something that shouldn't be there. They find a device of unknown origin, um,
And it's
buried in the rock layer.
it's only moderately interesting at this point. It's sort of something. The reason that it's interesting is that it is stratigraphically out of place. And what does that mean? So strata is layers of rock, and the deeper you go into that rock this is how you date fossils. For instance, you date by strata, and then you can use half life of stuff to further
Mhm.
narrow down the date. Well, here's this object that they found, and the only thing interesting about it at this point is that it seems to be technologically advanced or advanced materials, but it is buried deep enough that it should be at minimum thousands, if not millions of years old. It should be very, very old, but how can it be? Because it is a piece of technology of some sort, and they don't really know what it does yet. It's just
Yeah,
sort of interesting because it's new old. Uh, Now, I like
right.
the implication that this means that it is planted there.
Right. And if you want to know, is there ever going to be an explanation to how this? No.
No,
So within any Xeno series, the in Xenoblade, the object they find is they call it the conduit. It's a cross shaped object, and they call it the conduit. It's called the Zohar in both Gears and Saga. It's called the Zohar in the file name of the textures for it in Xenoblade, but it's officially
Mm.
known as the conduit. So it's called the conduit. So they find this thing buried in a lake bed in Africa, early 21st century, right about around now time. And like it's considered a magnetic abnormal matter. It shouldn't be there. Like, how is such a weird advanced piece of technology buried so deep within the earth here?
And
And
this might be the spot to talk about like what makes it advanced because it's it's very important for later on. Um, but the thing that makes it advanced, and for any of the physics nerds that listen, it's a perpetual motion machine. And it's a perpetual motion machine of all three types. So there's three types of perpetual motion machine. I'm not going to go deep into it, but it's suffice to say that each type of perpetual motion breaks a law of physics or a law of energy. I made some notes here in case anybody wants me to dive into that.
yeah,
But basically, the first law is the law of conservation of energy. E.g., a perpetual motion machine cannot exist without an external energy source. This does. How? Number two, a machine that spontaneously converts thermal energy into mechanical work, the physical law of entropy, meaning that it can't take one type of energy and transfer it into a type of mechanical work without a type of process and a loss of energy, meaning a certain amount of efficiency. Energy dissipates over time. Here, it does not. Yet the energy source for the gate, or the conduit in the English translation we're using, does not dissipate. It remains constant. So you have a constant source of energy and zero dissipation. Hmm. And then you have a machine that completely eliminates friction and other dissipative forces to maintain motion forever due to its mass inertia. So it is impossible to make such a machine. A dissipation can never be totally eliminated in a mechanical system, no matter how close a system gets to this ideal, not even in deep space where there's the least amount of friction that we know of. Can you do this? And yet, on Earth, deep under the rock, it operates without friction, without dissipation. So, if you want an idea of what could possibly be the impetus for a millennia long struggle, free energy. it
Yep.
is highly impressive, but at the time that they find it, we literally are too stupid to know anything other than shouldn't be old. But here it is.
So I mean, and you basically, as you hit the nail on the head there, like imagine finding a generator, if you will, a little gas powered generator that runs on nothing, runs on air. It'll power your house. It'll power your country.
Yeah,
And it doesn't run out, and it doesn't get hot, it doesn't blow up. It like you found an infinite well of energy.
yeah, all generators, all power generation today, solar, wind, uh, carbon, whatever, has like a dissipation effect, right? The best energy sources have the least amount of loss, right? I mean, burning wood has a loss of energy, a release of energy. That's what BTUs are, right? So imagine you find a generator that no matter how much energy you draw, there is no loss of efficiency. As much as you can take is as much as it'll give you. To our understanding, infinite.
And if you're wondering how big this thing is, it's like the size of a large bus. Just to get a sort of physicality to it. Like,
Yeah, bigger than you'd think you're going to find in the bottom of a lake bed, but not nearly big enough to do what it
yeah,
does.
it's not like they found a power plant down there. It's like the size of like a huge, like maybe like a truck, maybe even a semi truck.
And again, they find it and they're all like, "Oh, this does weird things to magnets. How do they work?" They move on. Like it's not for quite a while that they figure out what it does.
Right. And when they do kind of figure out what it does, it kind of solves a lot of problems, but creates a lot of problems in a way too. Because now the planet Earth no longer has a need for energy to for resource. The resource of energy in general has been solved. There's no more energy crisis. Period. If you think about that, like the implication of that is kind of insane. Um, where it's just kind of like like, okay, so we just have this thing that's the size of like a truck or a bus, and it just feeds really powerful energy out of it forever, and we don't have to worry about anything happening to it, kind of thing.
Yeah, at first, and this is probably what happens. I don't know this, but at first, I think it would cause a utopia. Uh,
Which it does, and it's called they call it the United Government. Basically, we don't. It's never stated if it's say UN or NATO, but let's just say like the UN kind of collectively comes together and say, okay, we have infinite energy now.
some would say it's a new world order.
Yes. so, so they basically, so when you have your energy crisis solved, there's people think, well, that's great. My lights never go out. How does that solve world peace? And it's like, well, just sort of imagine what you could do with never ever having to worry about an energy problem whatsoever, and how you can start applying that to things. And that does kind of lead into kind of like where it goes.
Everything
So
becomes infinitely cheaper. Um, you know, when you think about the costs associated with agriculture, you don't think like, oh, energy matters to that much, but it does. So now food is basically almost free. No one's ever starving. The amount of problems it solves is at least equal to the amount of problems it causes. But the number one problem that it causes is economic um, in that how do you secure economic power? How do you have a class system? What is the class system based on? And that might be like, oh, that's great. There's no class system, and that is great. But people with power want class systems. So how do people with power solidify their power? And then you
And to
get
be and then
it's
also to
wild.
be fair, if you were, hey, you did discover this thing, you're gonna want to know how it works, right?
Oh yeah,
So humans being humans, we do. So the United Government forms a research organization called IDOS, and their whole job is to basically, how does this work? Where does this thing? Where is it? How is it doing what it's doing? Can we repeat this possibly? That might be something in a future game, maybe, because that would tie into something with Saga, where they had what are called modifiers, basically like not as good clone, like man-made clone versions of maybe the conduit. That could happen someday. It's not in the games, but anyway. So they basically said it takes a lot of money and a lot of research to try to like understand this thing and make to form IDOS. So they do it. They basically spend a lot of, well, again, the economics are so who cares now. Um, but they gather a lot of researchers and scientists and builders together and be like, all right, figure this out, guys. And one of the first things IDOS figures out is that this thing with fully turned on, because here's the one thing we haven't really talked about. This thing has never been fully activated. Um,
right. Yeah, it's only partially active.
Right. So to fully activate the conduit, they're like, oh, it'll literally like tear a hole in the universe and basically open it up to basically anywhere you want to go, kind of thing, in like different
Right.
universes. And so they are like, okay, well, if we turn this thing to maximum output on the surface of the earth, that could be catastrophic. So IDOS proposes and gets granted to build a low orbit satellite station, and they build a ring around the planet,
Right.
and there's a big IDOS then builds a big university or a big living space, a big space station in low orbit.
And
Um,
it's not called Elysium, but now you have a class system.
Actually, you
Just,
do,
just
because
saying, yeah.
and how do you get there? It's not even by they don't even get there by rockets. They actually build three surface to low orbit elevators, which
Beanstalks.
they call them beanstalks because it goes up into the clouds. There's three of them. There's Radamanthus, there's Asius, and Minos.
Right.
And this is where I have to sort of deviate a little bit into. I'm going to have to assume things here. They build these three, but I'm jumping ahead of here, but they build three beanstalks. Again, Radamanthus, Asius, Minos. I might be pronouncing Asius wrong. It's but uh, yeah, I think it's Asus, whatever. Um, so you build these things, but here's where things get a little bit spotty. So they put the conduit, they put it into low orbit, just because they're like, okay, if you do experiments on this thing and accidentally do too much, you might cause a hole in time space on Earth. We're not going to do that. Put it into low orbit. Seems like a safe bet to me. Um, but to
Yeah.
regulate the conduit so that it doesn't accidentally do like they cause a whoopsie. They build a supercomputer to basically manage it, to manage the conduit itself, and it's a biocomputer as well. So there's even cellular technology being used in this thing. And to regulate it, they have three different processors. One's like one is takes there's an arbiter, and then there's two others, and basically the Trinity processor is basically the big supercomputer humans build in low orbit to basically run the conduit. And this Trinity processor uses AI to make judgment calls
Topical.
or whatever. So they literally have this thing basically designing itself. One of the things the Trinity processor does is it designs its own weapon fleet of autonomous unmanned vehicle weapons to basically protect the beanstalks and itself.
Right.
So that's one of the things this AI Trinity processor does. Is like, all right, it builds a defense system for itself. Um, But again, as you were, and I guess before we get to like where things go really south, one of the things humans decide to do with this infinite power that they have is to finally live out the dream of Star Trek. So they decide that they're going to build deep space colony ships. Uh,
Yeah, what are they? It's Project Exodus is
yeah,
what they call
project.
it.
So they call it Project Exodus. The first class of the ships are called Icarus, which I don't know if I would agree with that.
No, I wouldn't want to. Or
But
the eighth ship is called Icarus.
yeah, the eighth
Take
ship is called Icarus.
480,000 settlers.
Yeah, so they per ship. So that's like they say
Three million
three
is what
million. So they send 3 million people into deep space. They actually say where they're going. They're going to the Eta Carina Nebula, in the Sagittarius.
yeah, Carina Sagittarius arm of the Milky Way galaxy.
Yeah, which is a real place. You can look it up. It's there.
It's far.
It's far away.
Very
It's
far.
it's about 8,000 light years away. By this, so if they're traveling at the speed of light, it would take them 8,000 years to get there. We have no idea in Xenoblade if they've conquered faster than light travel. We just know that they initially sent 3 million people out into this Seta Carina Nebula, way out the Sagittarius arm.
Eventually, they send 10 million because they do another 5 at 1.5
Yeah.
million each.
Yeah. So at some point, they start building bigger ships called Philadelphia class motherships, which also a fun history aside, it's a Xenogears reference. It's also a reference to a really wild rumored experiment of our own government, where we were working on
Teleportation
yeah.
/ cloaking.
we were working on cloaking and teleportation on naval battleships, and apparently there's horror stories of how terrible this went. It's probably none of it's true, but
I don't know if any of it's true. I did meet a guy once that was apparently in the Navy at the time, and his friend lost a hand in the experiment. I don't know if that's true. He just could have been tales from his asshole. But like the whole rumor of that was that the ship disappeared, and when it came back, all the sailors that were on board, most of them had gotten melded into the ship, like body parts through steel walls, and like would have been chopped off, or like whole bodies melted into the wall. And supposedly this guy knew his buddy lost a hand through a wall. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if there's ever
molecular
been real...
scrambling or whatever. But yeah, so ships 9 through 13 were also being launched. So they were bringing the total to 13 million people. Were going out into a nebula 8,000 light years away. So that's happened. That's a thing. It's kind of something to kind of maybe keep in mind, maybe for future games, even though we're at the beginning of this chronological order. So I mean, just briefly, start of present day, the archaeologists find a weird machine. Some point in the future, probably within the next 100 years or so, they find them. Like they turn the machine on. They've solved the energy crisis on Earth forever. Basically the UN decides to come together as a unified government. They build Eidos to research this thing, this crazy machine that's giving them free energy forever. They figure out that if we really turn this on, we might rip a hole in time space. So they build a low orbit satellite station to put the conduit on. They build a giant supercomputer to regulate the machine so that there's no human error of accidentally flipping the switch too high or something. And then they have 3.
That'll be important later.
Yeah, they have 3 elevators from surface to orbit: Radamanthus, Asus, and Minos. Here's the thing: the head of the Minos Authority of the Minos Beanstalk is a man named Dmitry Yuriev. Now, this is a point of contention because this is a character in Xenosaga, and he is associated also with a known rebel group that actually decides to attack Radamanthus. So, at some point, the Saviorite rebels launch an assault against the Radamanthus Beanstalk and want to take the conduit, because they basically are declaring that the united government, shouldn't have sole access to the conduit and its infinite energy source.
Yeah, this is where I got slightly confused, because in the stuff specifically for this time period, the Saviorites are separate from the coalition / unified government, which is the same thing. The Saviorites must have some sort of backing Did they ever go into that?
So in Xenosaga, they do, which is why I'm gonna. Here's where I have to sort of pull from the previous franchise to sort of
Right on.
make sense into Blade. So in the previous franchise, Dmitry Yuriev is a genetically enhanced human. He's like Khan from Star Trek. He he runs a Yuriev Institute. He is a political figure, but he is also the head of the Saviorite rebel group in that game. So the Saviorite rebel group of the original game is all bioengineered humans. Now there is something we do get in Blade where they talk about the Saviorite Human Rights Act, which they're bringing forth to Congress, the Senate, whatever governing body runs the United Government.
Right, but it wasn't going to pass, right?
Wasn't, and they were basically saying it's probably not going to pass. Here's where I'm kind of basically pulling, kind of having to assume here. Humans started tampering with bioengineering because Realians and they call them designer children in Xenosaga. These are characters or people, a race in Xenosaga that are synthetically made and basically made to do slave labor, which to me makes the most sense. I'm like, okay, humans to solve their energy problem started bioengineering synthetic or genetically modified humans to build all these beanstalks. I'm guessing on the beanstalk part.
Well, it's like if you have unlimited energy, why there's no incentive to work. Everything becomes so cheap that it's not that there's no incentive to work. Humans will always find some way to be productive, whatever the incentive is. Economic incentive isn't the only incentive. The problem is like nobody wants to shovel shit.
Mhm.
And yet, one of the most important jobs in any city, in any society, is the guy who goes and breaks up fatbergs. But if you don't have to worry about the cost of food or shelter or manufactured goods because the energy is basically dirt cheap now, resources are dirt cheap.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to shovel fatbergs anymore. So who's going to do that? Then you have all sorts of moral quandaries that I think are very interesting. That the game seems to or the series seems to lightly touch on right now, but I have a feeling from what you've said in the past in other episodes
This
of
feels like a
podcasts,
setup.
it's going to be important.
Yeah, this feels like a setup. So the head of Minos, Dmitry Yuriev, he is bringing forth a Saviorite, Human Rights Act to Congress, and Congress is probably not going to pass it. So whatever group Dmitry either is part of, runs, is associated with, he's trying to argue to the United Government that they deserve basic human rights, and they're denying him that. So what is his response to this? All right, I'm taking away the thing that which gives you all the power. You shouldn't be in control of this. So he launches an assault. Some point, and it's called the year is not defined. It is 20XX. It is some amount of time, like 100 plus years in our own future. And so he basically leads an attack against Radamanthus to take the conduit back. Now remember, the Trinity processor on its own, the AI designed a defense system for it, so it engages with the Saviorite rebels attacking it. The interesting thing is that the machines the Saviorites are using in the cutscenes are the machines that you see housed inside the beanstalks, which means that the Saviorites had access to the insides. And again, Dmitry Yuriev is the head of the Minos Authority, which is one of the three beanstalks. So they had access to some of the interior machines inside these beanstalks. The Siren models, which are special models that the Trinity processor made, those are the ones that are basically protecting the conduit.
And they're sort of special because no part of them seems developed by human designs.
Right.
And they're not built to accommodate human anatomy or anything like that.
Right. They're totally unmanned vehicles.
And they run off of a thing called a slave generator. Now, this is going to be something that comes up a lot throughout the games, master versus slave, and Simmons will talk about it more. But in this context, slave generator is a programming term. It is literally slaved to, the conduit for energy. So it doesn't produce any energy on itself. The conduit powers these things somehow through the
Yeah,
air, like a
the
Tesla
slave.
coil.
So the slave generator is the receiver,
Right.
and it receives, and the master generator is the conduit itself. So the
Right.
energy it's siphoning goes, it gets sent immaterial out to the sirens into their, what are they're called, core crystals basically, and that's what's powering them.
Right. And that is, well, in this context right here, a programming term is an important thing to keep in mind for future episodes when we start talking about different relationships, because that is it's a core concept to both the religious and social commentary that the game is making throughout the rest of what we're going to talk about.
Right.
It's a key aspect to the lore. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, which
It's
is a
missed.
good point. So, okay, so you had limitless freedom. There's a great line in the game where it says, even when they've been provided limitless freedom, even when they've built themselves the perfect world, humans still desired the beyond. And of course they didn't. And of course they didn't run their world proficiently, because they started excluding people.
Right.
People started getting excluded from the little utopia they had built.
Caste system.
The interesting thing is, a lot of people think the three beanstalks are built in like L.A. or whatever because of the way the cul-de-sac looks, and it's like it's actually along the equator.
Yeah.
Which, if you look at the technology of surface to low orbit satellite elevators, which are actually potentially a thing, these are things that could actually happen. You would have to build it on the equator.
Yeah, they're it's not that they are feasible. Well, it's not that they're possible. It's just that like people have put a lot of work into, like, if you had certain things work, like the reason why there's an orbital ring is one of the ideas behind how you would make orbital stations and elevators work is that the ring pulling away from Earth actually keeps the beanstalks straight, and the spinning of Earth basically makes the beanstalks work like a spoke that keeps the ring
Yeah.
at a consistent, and keeps gravity on the ring. Like, it's this whole spoked wheel idea. There's a lot of interesting, you can find it on YouTube too, but there's a lot of interesting research on how you would make an orbital elevator work.
Yeah.
But yes, all of them would have to be built at the equator to make it work, even in
Yeah.
the slightest.
And apparently, one of the ways the Saviorite rebels decide to attack is by possibly targeting the anchor bolts, um, of
That'd be bad.
the orbital. So
That'd be real bad.
so this is all going down, and basically there's sirens are like kind of like the main force, the name of the main force of machines that the Trinity processor built to defend itself with. But there's an even bigger one called Ion. Um, it's a really big one, and that one has like a particularly nasty thing. I believe the sirens also have it, and that's a particle beam laser.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's just real biggin.
yeah, and basically these particle beams can kind of like operate almost on like a faster than light capacity, or at light speed capacity. And it's not using conventional means. It's not a explosive. It's not like a projectile device. It's a laser like device. Um, it's one of like the nastiest things it has. Anyways, so as a savior,
Doomsday weapon.
it's kind of
Yeah.
basically, yeah. So as the Saviorite rebels are basically trying to attack the beanstalk that is holding the Eidos Academy and holding the area where the conduit is being held, um, something goes really, really wrong. So the person in charge, the scientist in charge of operating the conduit and operating the Trinity processor, is a man named Klaus. And his close assistant is a woman named Galea. And they're scientists, so it's all about could have, never about should have.
Well, you never trust a German scientist in charge of a potential doomsday device. Not ever, right? Oh, I see your name here is Klaus. Oh, it's actually Klaus. Oh, get the fuck out. Get the fuck out of here. Who do you think you are? Not
No,
again.
no, 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 no. So So one of the interesting things they point out in this story is even though we have an energy crisis solved, we can't stop polluting the damn planet. And the war this is basically brought up between the haves and the have-nots has basically put it says on the verge of burning the skies above. Like we've almost toasted our own atmosphere at this point. Like we had a utopia initially,
Right.
and then everything kind of went to shit because a class system emerged.
Yeah. So if you had a utopia where you had free energy, all the jobs, if you're not or an educated researcher on IDOS, if you're not up there, all the jobs that would be on the actual planet would be like agriculture for growing food, but you could build machines to take care of that. So basically, everybody down on Earth is like a miner, and they're just strip mining the planet for parts and resources. And so you're talking about like everything's just shit down there. It wasn't at first, but it became that when the class system like devolved into, oh, if you've got the connections, you get to go up and live, either on one of the beanstalks or on the stations at the top of the beanstalks. And everything's great there. It's all free and clean and I don't know, like Singapore, except well, it's like Singapore actually. There's cameras everywhere and the government manages everything, but crime's real low, so that's nice.
Yay, real nice. Well, and that's actually one of the beautiful things. It's only teased, but like it really does sort of bring into effect the sort of idea that it's like, well, this is the future you want. Like if you build a society based on like, okay, we're better than others, we're gonna build our own utopia. It'll kind of only end one way.
Well, God, what was the name of that architect? Corbusier. It's the guy who designed modern architecture. He designed the Domino House. He's the reason skyscrapers all are ugly and architecture post 1970 is
Mm.
gross. He was hired by India to build a utopian city. Um, and so he went and built maybe one of the ugliest cities on the planet out of concrete. The idea being that there's no class distinction in any of the concrete buildings. And you know what happened? Oh, huge class distinctions where 4 or 5 lower class families would be stuck in a small apartment, and all the upper class people would have like bungalows and the
Mm.
higher up buildings. And oh, the level that has a pool. Oh, that's not for anyone in 50 or below. This is for me. So you now have an ugly city that is supposed to be a utopia, but instead it's just awful if you're on any of the bottom levels. That's this. It's like that movie Elysium where it's like, oh, you're Matt Damon's character and your whole job is you wear a fucking mech suit and strip mine the planet, and everyone who lives on Elysium, which is at the top of a beanstalk, super nice. Just a great life. Things are great up there. God, they've never built such a nice place. Don't look
Which
out the window.
which hilariously, that is what the top. That's what the low orbit station becomes called, is Elysium or Legend. That's the name of the legendary place it becomes later on in a future game.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah, it's no coincidence there.
one part of clarification, even though we're going in chronological order, which games is this information like sort of seeded? What
It,
games are we referencing here?
Xenoblade 2 and well, a little bit of one. Xenoblade, mostly Xenoblade 2 and Xenoblade 3 Future Redeemed DLC.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Future Redeemed DLC is a lot of this, right?
Because they were holding back a lot of information of the ancient history till the very end.
Right. You get to see Klaus in Future Redeemed.
You don't see him in
Isn't that?
Future. You see him in 1 and
Is that
2.
right? Okay. So Future Redeemed is where you get to see who's the half body guy
That's
that's
Klaus.
floating. That is Klaus still.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. So keep
So,
that in mind.
so jumping ahead here, Klaus is the head researcher of the conduit.
Right.
for Eidos. He lives in the first. He lives up in the low orbit satellite station. Lives in his Elysium. Lives at the top of Radamanthus. Anyways, he, as the Saviorite rebels are getting close to taking over the Beanstalk, so even the Sirens are starting to fail at their job, probably just because of sheer numbers. He locks out communications with the rest of the Beanstalk, because like the United Government, the head of Radamanthus, the director basically is like, he's getting to a point where it's like, I have to initiate Ion, which is the big Gundam looking thing. It's like the big doomsday device. And when they go to initialize it, they've realized they're locked out, and Klaus has locked everyone out. So Klaus has basically taken upon himself that Earth is doomed, pretty much. He uses, they use Ion. It's toast. Even if we win this battle, that's going to come back, and it's going to. Klaus is basically determined that humanity, it's done.
Yeah.
Like the system and body of government, what Earth is toast, and there's no coming back from this. Klaus has basically made that decision himself. So he decides to take upon the ultimate experiment. He's going to turn the conduit onto full power.
Crank that bitch to 11.
So his idea is kind of to Rick and Morty this whole fucking thing, which is basically just open the conduit to full power, open a time-space rift, go through it, take humanity to another Earth that didn't get fucked over by itself. That is his ultimate scheme. Like he's just like, I'm gonna Rick Sanchez this bitch.
Yeah, solid plan, bro.
Solid plan. Now, Galea, his assistant, is not on board with this idea.
I wonder why. Crazy German scientist is going to rip a hole in the space-time universe. Yeah, no, I don't know.
She tries to argue with him that like, this is a bad idea. You don't even fully understand this thing. And he's just like, no, this is this is a miracle. And he's like, his famous line of, once only a god could perform such a miracle. So he doesn't even, and the thing is that to open the conduit, like again, what's managing the conduit is the Trinity processor. He gets the sync rate up to 97% and says that should be good enough. Morgan Freeman spoiler, it was not good enough.
Oh no.
So even despite Galea's protests, he literally strong arms her, literally shoves her away, and is just like, no, like I'm, thinking he's going to be, do the great thing, save humanity, like ascend humanity even, and he boots the conduit onto full power. This doesn't go well. So, and again, like I'm not going to go into the part where I'm going chronologically here. He turns the conduit on at full power, and it triggers a space-time event. And one, there's three cores. There are three cores to the Trinity processor, hence the name Trinity. In English, it's called Ontos. It's a mistranslation. I don't know how they got wrong because it's spelled out in Latin, literally in texture as Uisa, but whatever. Ontos is basically the core processor that gets its information from the other two and mediates it. And when it turns it on to full blast, basically the thing is like, oh crap. So what it does is it basically leaves this universe. Turning on so basically turning on the thing to full power causes a time, I don't want to say a time rift. But basically it splits. It causes a split in the universe.
Okay. Yeah.
And Uisa, Ontos, one of the core processors goes with it. And one of the other core, or the other two are still on Earth. And this becomes a problem because basically the hole it creates, basically most people die. Well, pretty much all the humans die from this, from ripping a hole in time space as you would.
It makes you wonder what that experience would have been like for the humans. You know what I mean?
We do, and we kind of get a glimpse, and it's not pretty.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
Of what happens. So, like, because Klaus is in the room with the conduit when he turns it on, he becomes the sole survivor of this experiment. So
hard not to feel like a god then.
So yeah, so he turns the thing on. It basically triggers a huge time space event. Earth is basically annihilated. Um, Life is wiped out, and then the things that don't get wiped out, it's not pretty. Um, just think of it like super radiation, like Chernobyl style almost.
Yeah, so in the game they show like it looks like a giant lightning storm that eviscerates everything on the surface of the planet.
Yeah,
Like,
and followed by a big bright white flashing light. I wonder what the imagery was from that. Uh,
yeah, oh, the Trinity processor, you say? Oh, the scientists were worried that it would destroy the world, so they put it off in New Mexico. I mean, sorry, in orbit. Hmm. Hmm. Yes, I wonder what this is referencing.
so so Professor Klaus turns it on. Ghost will blast. Does exactly what they feared it would do. Everyone dead. Relatively speaking, everyone's dead except Klaus.
The poor assistant.
The poor assistant gets sucked into a time space rift. But she's lucky though, sort of, kind of. Her and an Ontos and half of Klaus's body are basically ripped into another dimension.
The lower half, or
The side half, it's like side. So
sick.
like so and he's still functioning alive, gross but sick. So Klaus is the only living conscious human left after this, turning this thing all the way on. And he basically is now alone in a space station with no living conscious human beings. Earth is basically wiped at this point. It's completely inhospitable.
Half his
Um,
fucking brain's gone.
Half his fucking brain is gone. That actually becomes important later in the next episode. But so so chronologically speaking, the first, I guess it's probably better to at least go into it a little bit where um he basically enacts a plan of like what do I do now? So um this does go a little bit. I'm
So you
treading a little bit
activated a
in.
time rift.
Right. He activated. So yeah, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, I guess. Here, I guess I think it would probably be better to save what does Klaus do after that, after turning the conduit to full power and creating this time space rift. So I guess I'll save that for part
Episode
episode 3. I'll save that for episode 3
3. Okay.
because episode 2 and 3 are happening back to back.
Right.
Timeline wise, I can't sit here and just be like bouncing back and forth between
No,
this
it'd be too
episode.
confusing.
Right. So yeah, Klaus does that. Half his body, Galea, and 1/3 of the Trinity processor gets sucked into another dimension. The rest of the Earth basically gets obliviated. I have no other way of actually saying that properly.
I think one of the interesting things about like the implications of this. So later on, my understanding is that like Earth becomes like a mythical place that people are looking for. Right? Is that kind of like a
Not really. There's actually nobody left on Earth except half of Klaus,
who is still alive
who
somehow?
is still alive.
Gross.
And he eventually just hooks himself up to life support systems so he can live out the number of years he needs to do to rebuild life period on the planet.
God.
So I guess basically backtracking a bit. So like, how does all this work? Like, what is this thing? And I think that's kind of time to dive in. I'll dive a little bit into what is ether. So
Right. Yeah.
So what is the conduit? When we talk about, it's this infinite energy machine. So the energy that gets outputted from the conduit is immaterial. It's like an energy source, right? Pure energy. They call this pure energy ether. That's the name of the energy. What it is they don't even really know. Again, one of the reasons why they formed Eidos was to study what is ether, where is this coming from. Ether is coming from a higher dimension. It's it's matter that's kind of being converted into antimatter. So you have this basically like just this sort of energy source that is, I guess, like, on an atomic level, a new substance that when it gets pushed through the conduit and when it comes into our dimension, it's immaterial, right? It's energy. It's just like a immaterial, not physical object, just energy source. Let's call it ether. And ether is what ends up powering everything. It powers the sirens, which is the defense mechanism for the Trinity processor and the conduit. It's what's powering everything. And it's pure energy. And as we'll see in the later games, in other dimensions, ether is physical. And it's what makes up the composition of, say, other dimensions.
So this is very similar to like the ancient civilization in The Expanse. For anyone that's read the Expanse series, there's an ancient civilization that powers, basically they suck energy from another dimension, and the big bads sort of in the way background are those interdimensional beings that are pissed. They're mad because it's destroying their world and pissing them off, so they're doing shit. They're fucking with our universe. Essentially.
Which is funny because even though it's 25 years old now, like that was kind of the plot of Xenogears, is that in that game's franchise and their Zohar, one of the things they discovered when they were siphoning ether energy was they captured a being, a presence inside it. They called it the wave existence. There is symbolism in Xenoblade suggesting that there might be a sentient thing within this ether energy that they're siphoning. Anyways, in Gears, the wave existence was a fifth dimensional being that was trapped inside the Zohar, trapped inside their conduit, and it wants to go home. And a big catastrophic event also happens, and he needs someone to put his thumb on the iPhone to get the DNA match printing to turn the conduit back on and send him home, like release me now kind of thing.
So
plot in Gears. It's not showed up in Blade though.
Yeah, so this is is Blade a reboot?
Yes, it's a retelling. It's a retelling reboot. Again, it's Ultimate Spider-Man to Amazing Spider-Man, or
right. So it's there is a possibility of more coming eventually
for Blade,
yeah,
not for the other games.
Yeah, no, the other games can't, right? Because there was like a copyright thing, right?
So Square owns Gears, and Namco owns Saga, and Nintendo owns Blade. The company that makes these games works for Nintendo, so Blade it is.
Interesting. So really, what we're getting at here is as we go into beyond ancient history, we've covered ancient history now. If you've played those other franchises, you have some insight into this because he's now finally getting to tell the whole story.
Yeah.
After he's been trying for 25 years. 25 years.
25.
And Blade is sort of the culmination, the cleaned up version of the story he's wanted to tell or tried to tell for ages, which is why it's semi-safe to make some connections here. If you're, if you were listening earlier when Matt made those connections from previous series, and you're like, oh, but those aren't the same series. You're right. They aren't the same series, but they are sort of. So some of the connections we're going to be making throughout this entire Lorecast are going to be based on the assumption that they're connected.
Hopefully not too much, because again, like the most where I have to sort of like assume it's going to be something. This is my like I said, mostly with Dmitry Yuriev and the Saviorite rebels. Those are things both in Xenosaga, and they don't have any real detail given to them in Blade. So I'm kind of putting a little bit of, I'm kind of connecting some dots based on what those characters were in Saga. So, and how they sort of seem to basically, like, how does that work in Blade? Because, okay, they're doing the same thing, but since we don't have any background info on them, they must have a pretty similar background to Saga since they have the same name. that they do in Blade, and they have like kind of like the same thing where they start a rebellion, they take over, they try to like coup, a
There's
huge
connections.
government.
There's obvious
So I'm like,
connections.
it's too, and things kind of get like, there's like poetry, it rhymes. Like things get too, there's too many instances where it is a very
It
clear, like,
overlaps.
hey, I'm doing the same thing again here. I am here. This is a repeat of this, So I'm like, okay, so since it wasn't outright stated who Dmitry Yuriev was, the only thing we know is he was the head of the Minos Authority, which is one of the three beanstalks. And we know there was a Saviorite rebel group, and we know Dmitry tried to get some sort of human rights bill passed for them that was was likely going to be denied, probably was denied. All kind of adds up. So that's where I jump ahead and say, like, okay, well, the Saviorites are probably like they were in Saga. They probably were synthetically created humans, replicants from Blade Runner, if you will, or bioengineered humans like in Star Trek, with Khan, Wrath of Khan. Probably
Right.
something like that, because that's what he was in Saga. That's what he was here. And that's probably why they're so pissed off. Like, I can't imagine. To me, it's just like, well, I don't know any other reason why they would be doing this other than, yeah, like a utopian government is denying you basic human rights. Then I don't think you should have full control over all energy source on this planet.
Right. Yeah. The dangers of one world government, as all humans have always been afraid of.
Which is kind
Um,
of funny that Xenoblade, in a weird way, kind of like floats this idea here that it's like, yeah, having a unified government totally didn't work out. Which
yeah.
it's kind of makes you wonder, like, are we against John Lennon here, or,
Oh,
is it
well.
more just sort of I think it's, as we'll see, though. Here's the thing: I think it goes a little deeper, and that is, we're prone to cycles of violence, and we're prone to sort of being in the sort of fear thing or whatever, where it's like the game's called Xeno, for God's sake.
Yeah.
So the whole point of the game is always about how two people who are different refuse to realize their differences and just go to war with each other over them. So I'm like, well, I
Yeah.
mean, and here's at the end of the day, my personal antidote is basically like, all right, you denied human rights to a sentient being, whether or not it was synthetic, created or genetically modified. Denying human rights to a sentient being, that's bad. Like, you should have done that. Like, that just seems like that seems like an easy one, an easy one up or whatever. And Star Trek has covered this. There was like an episode in Next Generation, Measure of a Man, where like they're arguing whether Data has human rights or not, because he's an android or whatever. And it's like, yeah, these are good concepts to have.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's probably hundreds of times in human history I mean, thousands of times in human history has slavery been posited as a solution to an economic problem like that, and then been overthrown because it turns out slaves don't like being slaves. Uh, the idea that we would have this utopia to where the only solution that we could think of as a race is to well, we're not gonna enslave humans, we're gonna make new beings that look like humans, and they have to be creative so they think like humans, and they're mostly
They
human,
can
but they're
take
not
orders.
human. They're not human, guys. They're mostly human, and they can be slaves because they were grown and so don't have rights. Like, yeah, it's the most human thing in the world that eventually the all-powerful unified government would come up with some way of creating an enslaved class that is totally okay to enslave. I bet you in the lead up to the Saviorites rebellion there, you'd have all sorts of debates about about the moral superiority of humans,
Yeah.
and shit like the thing is like, why would they fight a war over this conduit? Well, it's maybe the best MacGuffin to have a war fought over. Like, it's
A
this would
perpetual
turn,
energy machine, a perpetual motion machine.
yeah, creates infinite energy at no cost, and the cheaper it is to operate means that the greater the profit margin for a certain section of individual. So Now see, they could have done the smartest thing possible. They could have put the CEO of Arizona Iced Tea in charge of the conduit, and he would have kept that bitch 99 cents forever.
And that's actually kind of an interesting thing because, like, okay, you have a scientist who locks people out of his room. He doesn't make the right decision at all. And then you have the director of the Beanstalk, who's maybe not the director of the entire United government, but like, let's just say he was. His solution is to basically let loose the hounds of war and just annihilate his enemy, potentially at the cost of the atmosphere to his own planet.
In his defense, he tried legislation first. Clearly, he spent years trying to do it through the system. And when the system was like, go fuck yourself, he was like, no, no, go fuck yourself. uh, strong argument that everybody in that universe should have had the right to own a blade. Uh, but
Yeah. And then there's the interesting part that just to kind of keep this in your brain, 13, what was it? 13 million?
10 million
10 million, 10 to 11 million people were went into deep space,
far, far away.
far, far away. To me, and then again, that's info technically you don't get till the end of the series, but chronologically, it's very early in the timeline. So, if you're only going to watch this one episode, that might be the most important thing to learn about when Xenoblade 4 gets announced. Because I have my theory, which is I think those colonists that went out into deep space might come back.
I mean, it would make the most sense. Yeah.
Because they might come back and be like, wait a minute, why did the conduit go offline?
Wait a minute, where's Earth?
What the hell happened here? That is my big brain prediction. Jumping ahead here, I'm like, if we're getting to another game, I think that ship they teased going in, those ships, I should say, 13 ships, 11 million people. I'm going to predict that might. I don't know. Just saying, seems like a good setup.
So on that note, the next episode of the Lorecast will deal with like a future present. We'll now be into the timeline of the games, no longer ancient history, and we'll be talking about.
So the first thing we're going to learn about is to lead you off. Where did Galea, where did Ontos, and where did half of Klaus go? Because they were in the room with the conduit when it went full power. They're the only people to survive the transition to another dimension. So what's going to happen? What that will be in episode 2 will be what happened to those three. And I had a name for it, but it's gone now because I had a computer outage last night. But anyways, but that'll be episode 2, A World Without Gods.
So, hell yeah, nice. Stay tuned. But for now, we have producers to thank. As always, if you would like to become a patron at any level, please check out patreon.com/YoVideogames podcast. Due to the week was Mike A. Mike, you got a good episode to be due to the week on. I hope you're happy. And our producers for this episode are Dragon Wolf Makoto, Austinite, Zybernite, Scrunami, Kuroi 35, Hyper Viper 89, Hockey Kong 64, LCL Mayhem, and Ziggy Z. Thank you, dudes. We'll catch you next time.
Later, dudes.